Danielle had spent 3 days preparing for what she thought would be the happiest moment of her life. Her sons Philip and Jasvi had finally achieved their dreams. Philip's tech startup had been acquired, and Jasvi had landed a senior position at a prestigious firm. They'd promised to move her from their small village to live with them in comfort in Abuja. This is a true life story that serves as a powerful reminder to be cautious about whom we trust with our deepest secrets. Not everyone who smiles at us has pure intentions, and not everything we see on the surface reflects the truth within. People can hide behind masks, and the human heart can be cunning, unpredictable, and capable of deceit. Thank you so much for stopping by. Please support me by subscribing to my channel, like, and share this video to your family and friends. I truly appreciate your kind heart. So, let's begin. The morning sun cast long shadows across her modest compound as she folded her few precious belongings. A faded photograph of her late husband Matthew, the worn Bible that had sustained her through countless difficult nights, and the simple jewelry he'd given her during their courtship. These were the treasures that mattered most to a woman who had sacrificed everything for her children's education. Life had been an endless struggle since Matthew's sudden death from a heart attack 7 years ago. Danielle had worked multiple jobs, washing clothes by the river, selling vegetables at the local market, cleaning houses for the wealthy families in town. Her hands had grown rough and calloused, her back had bent from carrying heavy loads, but her spirit had remained unbroken. Every naira she earned went toward school fees, textbooks, and the dream that her boys would one day escape the poverty that had trapped their family for generations. Philip had been the first to leave for university, studying computer science in the capital. Jasvet had followed 2 years later, pursuing business administration. The sacrifices had been enormous. Danielle had sold her wedding jewelry to pay for Philip's final year tuition. She had gone without meals so that Jasvet could have money for books and accommodation. But now, finally, her suffering was about to end. "Mother, pack light," Philip had told her during their last phone conversation. "We'll buy you everything new in Abuja. You'll have your own room, a television, air conditioning. You'll never want for anything again." The thought brought tears to her eyes. After years of sleeping on a thin mattress in a room with a leaking roof, the idea of comfort seemed almost too good to believe. As she prepared for her son's arrival, Danielle decided she needed to share her joy with someone. Her elder sister Naomi lived just a 15-minute walk away, in a compound that was slightly larger but equally modest. Despite their occasional differences, Naomi had been her closest companion through the lonely years of widowhood. The invitation to celebrate at her sister Naomi's house seemed natural. After all, shouldn't family share in such joy? "Sister, I'm so proud of my boys," Danielle said, as she helped Naomi prepare the evening meal. "After their father Matthew passed, I thought we'd never recover. There were nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering how I would manage alone." Naomi stirred the pot with unusual force, the wooden spoon scraping against the bottom with sharp, aggressive movements. "Yes, they've done well," she replied, her voice flat and measured. "Though I wonder if they remember who helped raise them when you were working those double shifts." Danielle paused in her chopping of vegetables, sensing an edge she hadn't noticed before. "Of course they remember, Naomi. You've always been like a second mother to them. When I had to work late at the market, you fed them. When they needed help with homework, you were there. I could never have managed without you." But as the evening progressed, Naomi's comments grew sharper, more pointed. She reminded the young men of every favor, every meal, every bit of help she'd provided over the years. Each memory was presented not as acts of love, but as debts that had never been properly acknowledged or repaid. "Do you remember, Philip, when you were 12 and fell sick with malaria? Your mother was working 3 jobs and couldn't take time off. I sat by your bedside for 4 days, feeding you medicine, cooling your fever with wet cloths. And Jasvet, when you wanted to quit school because the other children were mocking your torn uniform, who convinced you to stay? Who found fabric and sewed you a proper shirt so you could hold your head high?" By the time dessert was served, the celebration felt more like a reckoning, a careful accounting of unpaid emotional debts. That night, Naomi couldn't sleep. She walked through her small house, looking at the worn furniture that hadn't been replaced in a decade, the leaking roof that she couldn't afford to repair, the empty refrigerator that reflected her constant financial struggles. Down the road, her sister was packing for a life of luxury while she remained forgotten, relegated to memories and occasional visits. The injustice of it consumed her thoughts. Why should Danielle benefit from children she'd barely been present to raise during their most formative years? Yes, Danielle had worked to pay their school fees, but Naomi had been there for the day-to-day struggles, the emotional support, the guidance that actually shaped their character. She had sacrificed her own opportunities for those boys. When her husband had left her 15 years ago, she could have remarried, could have focused on building her own family. Instead, she had chosen to help her sister, to be the stable presence those children needed. And now, what did she have to show for it? An empty house, an empty life, and the prospect of growing old in poverty while watching her sister live in comfort. The thought that had been growing in her mind for weeks now crystallized into a plan. Those boys deserved to know the whole truth about their mother. They deserved to understand who had really sacrificed for them, who had really earned their loyalty and gratitude. She reached for her phone and dialed a contact she hadn't called in years, Baba Idawo, a man known throughout the region for his particular services. Some called him a traditional healer, others whispered that he dealt in darker arts. All Naomi knew was that he had helped other people in the village solve problems that seemed impossible to fix through conventional means. "I need them to see clearly," she told him the next morning, pressing a significant portion of her savings into his weathered palm. "My nephews deserve to know the whole truth about their mother. They deserve to understand who really deserves their love and support." Baba Idawo examined the money carefully, then looked into Naomi's eyes with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. "Truth has many faces," he replied cryptically. "Sometimes people need help seeing which face serves them best. But remember, sister, when you plant seeds of doubt, you cannot always control what grows from them." "I don't want to hurt anyone," Naomi said quickly. "I just want justice. I want recognition for everything I've done." The old man prepared a mixture of herbs and other substances she didn't recognize. "Sprinkle this in their food when they come to visit you. It will not harm their bodies, but it will open their minds to possibilities they hadn't considered before. They will begin to question things they had always taken for granted." The change in Philip and Jasfet was gradual but unmistakable. It began with small comments during their weekly phone calls with their mother, questions that seemed innocent but carried undertones of suspicion. "Mother, why did Father's business fail so suddenly before he died? Aunt Naomi mentioned that you were very interested in his financial affairs around that time. Is it true that you were seeing that herbalist, Baba Kemi, before Father passed? Aunt Naomi says some people in the village found it strange." Suddenly, childhood memories took on sinister new meanings. Their mother's long work hours weren't sacrifice. They were abandonment, a way to avoid the responsibilities of proper parenting. Her discipline wasn't guidance. It was cruelty born from resentment at being burdened with children she hadn't really wanted. Their father's sudden death, once understood as a tragic heart attack, now carried whispers of suspicious circumstances. Naomi was masterful in her approach. She never directly accused Danielle of wrongdoing. Instead, she planted questions, shared concerns that other villagers had expressed, and reminded the young men of incidents from their childhood that could be interpreted in multiple ways. "Don't you think it's odd how quickly she wanted to sell your father's land after he died?" she would say during their visits. "Almost as if she was eager to erase all traces of him. I've always wondered why she never wanted to hold a proper funeral ceremony. She said it was about money, but your father had insurance. The village elders thought it was suspicious. Remember how she used to disappear for hours on those mysterious errands? She said she was looking for work, but I always wondered. A woman needs companionship, especially when her husband is unwell." Each conversation was like a drop of poison in a well, slowly contaminating the pure love and respect the sons had always felt for their mother. Naomi was careful to present herself not as someone making accusations, but as a concerned aunt who was reluctantly sharing troubling information that had been weighing on her conscience. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated and effective. Naomi would start each conversation by praising Danielle, then introduce a small doubt, then quickly change the subject as if she regretted bringing up such sensitive matters. This made the sons feel as if they were discovering these concerns on their own, rather than having them planted by someone with ulterior motives. Within weeks, the sons who had promised their mother a life of comfort were treating her like a stranger. The house they'd bought for her was quietly resold. The monthly allowance they'd planned was canceled. Phone calls went unanswered, and when she managed to reach them, their voices were cold and formal. "Mother, we think it's better if you stay in the village for now," Philip told her during one particularly painful conversation. "We need some time to sort things out." "But son, what about our plans? What about the house in Abuja? You said I'd never have to struggle again." "Plans change, Mother. We're not the same naive children we used to be. We have responsibilities now, and we need to think carefully about how we manage our resources." Danielle found herself more isolated than she'd ever been, even during the hardest days of widowhood. At least then, she'd had hope for the future, faith that her sacrifices would eventually be rewarded. Now, that hope had been transformed into a bitter mockery. Philip threw himself into his work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. His tech company was thriving, but success brought no satisfaction. He found himself constantly looking over his shoulder, suspicious of everyone's motives, convinced that people were trying to take advantage of him, just as he now believed his mother had done throughout his childhood. His relationship with his girlfriend Julia began to deteriorate. She couldn't understand the sudden change in his personality, the way he'd become cold and calculating, suspicious of every gesture of affection. "What happened to you?" she asked during one of their increasingly frequent arguments. "You used to be kind, generous, trusting. Now you act like everyone is plotting against you." "I grew up," Philip replied harshly. "I learned that people aren't always what they seem. Even the people closest to you can be using you." "Are you talking about your mother?" "Philip, that woman sacrificed everything for you and your brother. How can you just abandon her like this?" "You don't know the whole story," he said, his voice filled with a bitterness that chilled Julia to the bone. "There are things about my family that I'm only now beginning to understand." Meanwhile, Jasfit was struggling with his own demons. His descent into guilt began 3 months after they'd cut ties with their mother. Living in his expensive apartment, surrounded by all the markers of success, he felt increasingly hollow. Unlike Philip, who seemed to channel his confusion into anger and ambition, Jasfit found himself plagued by doubts. Late at night, when the distractions of work and social obligations couldn't drown out his thoughts, he would remember small moments from his childhood. His mother singing to him when he was sick, the way she would save the best pieces of meat for him and Philip, claiming she wasn't hungry. The pride in her eyes when he graduated from secondary school, even though she'd had to borrow money to buy him a proper shirt for the ceremony. These memories didn't align with the picture Aunt Naomi had painted of a selfish, manipulative woman who had used her children for personal gain. But every time he started to question the narrative, he would remember the evidence Naomi had presented, the concerns she'd shared, the patterns of behavior she'd pointed out. The cognitive dissonance was tearing him apart. His professional life began to suffer. He made careless mistakes, missed important deadlines, and alienated colleagues with his increasingly erratic behavior. His supervisor called him into the office for a serious conversation about his performance. "Jasfit, you're one of our most talented analysts, but your work has been inconsistent lately. Is everything all right at home? Are you dealing with some kind of personal crisis?" How could he explain that he was drowning in uncertainty about everything he'd once believed about his family, his childhood, his identity? How could he articulate the pain of loving someone he'd been convinced was his enemy? Seeking clarity and perhaps some form of redemption, Jasfit decided to return to the village. Not to see his mother, whom he still believed had wronged them, but to visit his father's grave and make sense of his turbulent emotions. Perhaps in that quiet place, surrounded by memories of a man he'd loved without reservation, he could find some peace. The journey home was emotionally grueling. Every familiar landmark brought back memories that now seemed tainted by doubt and suspicion. The school where his mother had scraped together fees, the market where she'd sold vegetables to support them, the church where she'd prayed every Sunday for their success and happiness. The family plot was overgrown with weeds and wild grass. Clearly, no one had been maintaining it regularly. As Jasfit cleared the vegetation from his father's headstone, reading the simple inscription that marked Matthew's short life, his hand struck something hard buried in the soft earth near the base of the grave. What he unearthed changed everything. A metal box, carefully wrapped in oilcloth and perfectly preserved despite years underground. Inside was his father's personal journal, along with documents and letters that Jasfit had never seen before. The journal entries painted a picture of a man deeply in love with his wife, constantly worried about providing for his family, and profoundly grateful for his sister-in-law Naomi's help during difficult times. But they also revealed a growing concern about Naomi's increasing resentment and possessiveness toward his children. March 15th. Naomi came by again today, asking strange questions about Danielle's behavior, her relationship with the children, her plans for the future. She seems convinced that Danielle doesn't fully appreciate what she has, doesn't deserve the boy's love. I'm starting to worry about what she might do after I'm gone. The children adore their aunt, but there's something in her eyes lately that troubles me. April 2nd. Had another heart episode today. Doctor says I need to reduce stress, but how can I when I'm so worried about my family's future? Danielle works so hard, sacrifices so much. If something happens to me, I fear Naomi's jealousy might poison the children against their mother. I've decided to hide some emergency savings where Danielle can find them if needed. April 20th. This may be my last entry. The chest pains are getting worse, and I can feel my strength failing. I've hidden savings and some valuable items behind the kitchen wall, enough to help Danielle if Naomi ever turns the boys against her. I pray it won't be necessary, but a father must protect his family even from beyond the grave. The final entry, dated just 2 days before Matthew's death, was chilling. Naomi visited today with that strange man from the next village, the one people say deals in dark arts. They spoke in whispers and left quickly when Danielle returned from the market. I don't like this. I don't like this at all. If something happens to me, I want my sons to know that their mother is innocent of any wrongdoing. The only danger to this family comes from within, from jealousy disguised as love. Following his father's detailed instructions, Jasfet found the hiding place behind the kitchen wall of their old house. The current occupants, distant relatives who had been caring for the property, allowed him to search when he explained that his father had left some family documents there. Inside the cavity, along with modest savings that had helped sustain the family after Matthew's death, was something extraordinary. A collection of rough diamonds that Matthew had acquired through a business deal years earlier, never having had them properly evaluated or sold because he'd wanted to save them for his son's education. But more important than the gems were the letters, dozens of them, written by Matthew to each of his sons, meant to be read when they became men. The letters spoke of Danielle's sacrifices, her unwavering love, her nights spent crying over school fees and worrying about their future, her joy at their smallest achievements. My dear Philip, one letter began, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you, and you have grown into the man I always knew you would become. I want you to know that your mother is the strongest, most selfless person I have ever known. She has never put her own needs before those of her family. Every decision she makes is guided by love for you and your brother. If someone ever tries to convince you otherwise, if anyone ever suggests that she is anything less than the perfect mother, remember these words from your father. Danielle would die before she would harm either of you. She would sacrifice her last breath to ensure your happiness and success. There may come a time when people who claim to love you will try to turn you against her. They will present themselves as your protectors, your true advocates. But remember, son, that jealousy is a powerful poison, and those who have not earned a place in your heart through genuine sacrifice may try to steal it through manipulation and lies. Your mother earned her place in your heart through sleepless nights, empty plates, calloused hands, and tears shed in private so you would never know the extent of her struggles. Honor that sacrifice. Protect her as she has always protected you. Each letter was a testament to Matthew's deep understanding of his wife's character and his prescient fear that others might try to exploit his son's natural gratitude and love for their extended family. Armed with the truth and consumed by guilt over his betrayal of his mother, Jasfet raced to Abuja to find Philip. But his brother, now completely under Naomi's psychological influence, refused even to look at the letters or consider the possibility that they had been manipulated. The confrontation took place in Philip's luxurious office, surrounded by all the symbols of the success that their mother's sacrifices had made possible. Jasfet spread the letters across the mahogany desk, his hands shaking with emotion. "Brother, you have to read these. Father knew. He knew what Aunt Naomi was planning. He tried to warn us from beyond the grave." Philip barely glanced at the documents. Those could be forgeries. How convenient that you found them just when you're having doubts about our decision. "Philip, look at the handwriting. Look at the dates. These are real. Father wrote these letters because he loved us and wanted to protect us from exactly what's happening now." "What's happening now is that we're finally seeing clearly," Philip replied, his voice cold and certain. "We're finally understanding that we were used, manipulated by a woman who saw us as her meal ticket out of poverty." The argument escalated quickly, years of suppressed tension and recent manipulation combining into an explosive confrontation. Philip accused Jasfet of being weak, of allowing their witch mother to bewitch him again. Jasfet pleaded with his brother to remember their childhood, to consider the possibility that they had been deceived. "She fed us poison, Philip. Aunt Naomi literally poisoned our minds against the woman who gave us everything. Can't you see what she's done to us?" "The only poison here is what you're trying to spread," Philip shouted, rising from his chair with fury. "I won't let you destroy what we've built. I won't let you bring that woman back into our lives to finish whatever scheme she started years ago." The argument ended with Philip making an ultimatum that would shatter what remained of their family bonds. "Choose," he screamed, his face red with rage. "Choose right now. Them or me. Our aunt who actually raised us, who actually sacrificed for us, or the woman who abandoned us to work and used us for her own advancement. You can't have both." Jasfet looked into his brother's eyes and saw a stranger. Someone consumed by bitterness and suspicion, someone who had lost the ability to recognize love when it was offered freely. "I choose truth," Jasfet said quietly. "I choose the woman who went without food so we could eat, who sold her wedding jewelry for our school fees, who worked 3 jobs to give us opportunities she never had. I choose our mother." Philip's response was swift and brutal. Jasfet was fired from the company, banned from the office building, and cut off from all family financial support. The brother who had once been his closest friend and ally became his most bitter enemy, all because he had chosen to believe in love over manipulation, truth over convenient lies. Returning to the village with nothing but the diamonds his father had left and a heart full of regret, Jasfet faced the most difficult moment of his life. Approaching the woman he had betrayed and asking for forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve. He found his mother in a state he'd never seen her, thin, aged beyond her years, and broken in spirit. The community had turned against her based on rumors that Naomi had carefully spread throughout the village. She was surviving on the charity of Felicia, a young woman who had recognized Danielle's true character and refused to believe the lies that swirled around her. Felicia had recently returned from her national service program and was living temporarily with her parents while looking for employment. She had grown up hearing stories about Danielle's kindness and generosity from her own mother, who had been helped by Danielle during a difficult period years earlier. When the rumors began circulating about Danielle's alleged crimes and character flaws, Felicia was one of the few people who actively defended her. She brought food when others shunned Danielle, sat with her during the lonely evenings when the isolation became unbearable, and provided the emotional support that kept Danielle from completely losing hope. The reunion between mother and son was heartbreaking. Danielle wept not just from joy at seeing Jasfet again, but from relief that at least one of her children had found his way back to her. But there was also wariness in her eyes, the caution of someone who had been deeply hurt and wasn't sure she could risk being vulnerable again. "My son," she whispered, touching his face as if she couldn't believe he was real. "You came back." "Mama, I'm so sorry," Jasfit said, falling to his knees before the woman who had given him everything. "I was blind. I was foolish. I allowed someone else's poison to turn me against the person I should have protected above all others." The process of rebuilding their relationship was slow and sometimes painful. Danielle had to learn to trust again, while Jasfit had to prove that his return was genuine and permanent, not just a temporary moment of guilt that would pass when life became comfortable again. Using the diamonds he'd discovered and his own savings from his years of work, Jasfit made investments that quickly began generating substantial returns. His business acumen, combined with the valuable gems his father had left, created opportunities for wealth that exceeded even what he'd earned working for Philip's company. Within 6 months, he was able to purchase a beautiful home in a prestigious neighborhood of Abuja. The house was large enough for multiple families, surrounded by gardens and security, a place where his mother could live in comfort and safety for the rest of her life. He brought both Danielle and Felicia to live with him, creating a household based on mutual respect, gratitude, and genuine affection. Felicia had become like a daughter to Danielle during the months when she'd had no one else, and their bond was one of the few bright spots in an otherwise dark period. As Jasfit and Felicia spent more time together, their shared values of loyalty, compassion, and integrity naturally drew them closer. Their relationship developed slowly, built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared commitment to caring for Danielle and building something positive from the wreckage of the family's recent trauma. Meanwhile, Naomi's schemes were beginning to collapse under their own weight. Her son George, whom she had convinced Philip to hire as a senior manager in the tech company, proved to be both incompetent and dishonest. Lacking the skills and work ethic that the position required, he began embezzling funds to maintain a lifestyle he couldn't afford and to hide his professional failures from his mother. George's theft was initially small and carefully concealed, but his growing desperation and sense of entitlement led him to take increasingly large amounts. He created fake vendor accounts, approved fictitious contracts, and diverted company resources for personal use. The scheme might have continued indefinitely if not for George's arrogance and carelessness. He began flaunting wealth that far exceeded his legitimate salary, purchasing expensive cars and jewelry, taking lavish vacations, and generally living like someone with unlimited resources. When Philip finally discovered the theft through a routine audit, the total amount stolen was staggering. George had embezzled nearly $500,000 over the course of just 8 months. The discovery led Philip to conduct a deeper investigation into how such massive fraud could have gone undetected for so long. The trail inevitably led back to Naomi and the web of manipulation and lies she had constructed to position her family to benefit from Philip's success. Security footage, email records, and financial documents painted a clear picture of deliberate deception and systematic exploitation. But the most damning evidence came from George himself, who, when confronted with irrefutable proof of his crimes, broke down and confessed not only to the embezzlement, but to his mother's larger scheme to turn the brothers against their mother and take control of their wealth. "She said it was justice," George sobbed during his confession. "She said Aunt Danielle didn't deserve what she had, that we were the ones who really raised Philip and Jasfit. She said we were just taking what should have been ours all along." The shock of realization was devastating for Philip. In one moment, his entire worldview collapsed. The woman he had trusted, the aunt he had chosen over his own mother, had been systematically manipulating and stealing from him while he persecuted the one person who had never asked for anything but his love. Philip's journey back to truth was far more painful than Jasfit's had been. While Jasfit had been tormented by doubts and guilt that had eventually led him to seek answers, Philip had thrown himself completely into the false narrative, burning bridges and making declarations that couldn't be easily undone. When he rushed back to the village to beg forgiveness, he found only an empty house. Danielle had moved on, literally and emotionally, leaving behind the place where she had suffered so much rejection and humiliation. It took weeks of investigation and inquiries before Philip was able to track down his family's new address in Abuja. When he finally stood before the gates of Jasvet's beautiful compound, he was struck by the irony that his brother, the one he had cast out and called weak, had achieved a level of success and stability that exceeded his own. The reunion was awkward and tense. Danielle was polite but distant, her natural kindness warring with the very real trauma she had experienced as a result of Philip's actions. She had forgiven him in her heart, as her faith demanded, but forgiveness didn't automatically restore trust or intimacy. "My son," she said when she saw him, her voice carefully neutral. "You've come." "Mama, I've been such a fool. I've hurt you in ways I can never undo. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm begging for the chance to try to make things right." The conversation that followed lasted for hours and was emotionally exhausting for everyone involved. Philip had to confront not only his own actions, but also the depth of pain he had caused and the extent to which he had allowed his judgment to be corrupted by manipulation. Jasvet was initially resistant to welcoming Philip back into their lives, fearing that his brother's presence would reopen wounds that had only begun to heal for their mother. But Danielle, true to her character, insisted that the family should be given a chance to heal together. "Hatred and resentment only create more suffering," she told Jasvet. "Philip was as much a victim of Naomi's manipulation as I was. If we're going to build something good from this tragedy, we have to choose love over bitterness." Philip's reintegration into the family was a gradual and sometimes difficult process. Unlike Jasvet, whose return had been motivated by guilt and love, Philip's initial approach was driven more by a desperate need to assuage his conscience than by genuine transformation. It took months of family counseling, honest conversations, and consistent demonstration of changed behavior before the relationships began to heal. When he tried to reconnect with her, she was initially skeptical about whether his transformation was genuine or just another manipulation. "How do I know you won't change your mind again?" she asked during one of their tentative meetings. "How do I know that some other person won't come along with a different story that convinces you to abandon everyone who loves you?" It took nearly a year of consistent behavior and gradual rebuilding of trust before Julia was willing to consider a serious relationship again. Their eventual marriage was built on a much more mature foundation than their original romance, with both partners having learned difficult lessons about the importance of loyalty, communication, and critical thinking. Danielle lived to see her grandchildren born and to play an active role in their upbringing. The trauma she had experienced had aged her physically, but becoming a grandmother brought back much of her natural joy and optimism. She was determined that the next generation would grow up understanding the importance of family loyalty and the dangers of allowing outsiders to poison relationships between blood relatives. Jasvet and Felicia's children grew up hearing stories about their grandmother's sacrifices and their grandfather's wisdom. They learned about the importance of thinking critically about information, even when it comes from trusted sources, and about the need to protect family bonds against those who might try to exploit them. Philip and Julia's children grew up in a more complex environment, where the consequences of past mistakes were more visible. They learned about redemption and second chances, but also about the lasting effects of betrayal and the hard work required to rebuild trust once it's been broken. Both couples were intentional about maintaining extended family relationships while teaching their children to recognize the signs of manipulation and unhealthy jealousy. They created family traditions that honored Matthew's memory and celebrated Danielle's resilience, ensuring that future generations would understand the true history of their family. The children grew up visiting their great-grandfather's grave together, hearing stories about his love for their grandmother and his wisdom in preparing for challenges he wouldn't live to see. They learned to see their family's story not as a tragedy, but as a testimony to the power of truth, love, and perseverance to overcome even the most destructive attempts at manipulation. As Danielle entered her 70s, she began to reflect more deeply on the lessons her family's ordeal had taught them. She started writing her own memoir, not for publication, but as a record for her grandchildren and great-grandchildren who would come after her. "My dear descendants," she wrote in the introduction, I want you to understand that every family faces tests that reveal who people really are underneath their public faces. Some of these tests come from outside circumstances: poverty, illness, death, natural disasters. But the most dangerous tests often come from within, from people who claim to love you but whose love is poisoned by jealousy, resentment, or selfish ambition. The hardest lesson I learned is that evil rarely announces itself openly. It comes disguised as concern, as justice, as protection. The person who wants to destroy your family will not usually attack you directly. Instead, they will try to turn you against each other, using your own love and loyalty as weapons against you. But I also learned that truth is more powerful than lies, even when lies seem to be winning for a long time. Love is more powerful than manipulation, even when love seems naive and vulnerable. And family bonds, when they are based on genuine sacrifice and authentic care, are stronger than any force that tries to break them. Her memoir became a family treasure, passed down through generations as a reminder of both the fragility and the resilience of human relationships. The story of Danielle's family became known throughout their region as a cautionary tale about the dangers of family manipulation and the importance of critical thinking. Social workers and counselors began using elements of their story in training programs about recognizing psychological abuse and family systems dysfunction. Jasfet and Felicia established a foundation that provided support for elderly parents who had been abandoned by their adult children, as well as counseling services for families dealing with manipulation and estrangement. The foundation's work helped dozens of families recognize and heal from similar patterns of abuse. Philip used his business platform to speak about the importance of ethical leadership and the dangers of making decisions based on incomplete or manipulated information. His company became known not just for its technical innovations, but also for its commitment to integrity and family-friendly policies that recognize the importance of employees' personal relationships. The foundation also funded research into the psychology of family manipulation, helping mental health professionals better understand how intelligent, loving people can be turned against their own family members through systematic psychological abuse. Naomi's story served as a stark reminder that destructive choices ultimately destroy the person, making them as much as their intended victims. After George's imprisonment and the exposure of her manipulation, she lived her final years in increasing isolation and bitterness. Several community leaders and religious figures attempted to reach out to her, offering opportunities for genuine repentance and reconciliation. But Naomi remained convinced that she had been the victim of an unfair world that didn't appreciate her sacrifices. She never acknowledged the harm she had caused or took responsibility for her actions. Her death, when it came, was lonely and unmourned except by a few distant relatives who felt obligated to arrange a basic funeral. The contrast with the life she might have lived, surrounded by the love and gratitude of the nephews she had helped raise, was a sobering reminder of how choices have consequences that extend far beyond their immediate effects. George, upon his release from prison, made genuine efforts to change his life and make amends for his crimes. He sought out Philip and asked for forgiveness, not expecting to receive it but recognizing that acknowledging his wrongs was necessary for his own healing. Philip, having learned about the power of forgiveness from his mother's example, chose to forgive George while maintaining appropriate boundaries. George was never welcomed back into the family business or inner circle, but he was not actively shunned or punished beyond the legal consequences he had already faced. As years passed, the strength of the family's healing was tested by various challenges. Economic difficulties, health crises, disagreements about business decisions, and the normal stresses of life all had the potential to reopen old wounds or create new conflicts. But the family had learned valuable lessons about communication, trust, and the importance of addressing problems directly rather than allowing them to fester. When disagreements arose, they had developed systems for working through them without allowing outside parties to exploit the tensions. Danielle's role as the family matriarch was particularly important during these challenging periods. Her moral authority, earned through years of sacrifice and demonstrated wisdom, made her an effective mediator when conflicts arose between her sons or between different branches of the growing family. She also served as a living reminder of the importance of putting family loyalty above material concerns. When business partnerships or financial opportunities arose that might create conflicts within the family, her guidance helped them make decisions that prioritized relationships over profit. The grandchildren who grew up hearing their family's story developed a particular sensitivity to manipulation and emotional abuse in their own relationships. They were able to recognize when friends, romantic partners, or colleagues were trying to turn them against their family members, and they had the tools to resist such attempts. This protective awareness served them well in their adult lives, helping them build strong marriages and maintain healthy family relationships even as they pursued independent careers and developed their own social circles. Some of the grandchildren chose to continue the family tradition of business and entrepreneurship, while others became teachers, social workers, counselors, and other professionals dedicated to helping people and strengthening communities. But regardless of their career choices, they all carried forward the values of integrity, loyalty, and critical thinking that had been so hard-won by their parents and grandparents. The family's wealth continued to grow through wise investments and successful business ventures, but more importantly, their emotional and spiritual wealth grew through their commitment to supporting each other and using their resources to help others facing similar challenges. When Danielle passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 82, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren who loved and honored her, her funeral became a celebration of a life well lived despite tremendous challenges. The church was packed with people whose lives she had touched, not just family members, but also people she had helped during her years of poverty, young people she had mentored, and community members who had been inspired by her resilience and grace. Philip and Jasfet both spoke at the funeral, sharing not only their love and gratitude for their mother, but also the lessons they had learned from the family's journey through betrayal to healing. Their words served as both a tribute to Danielle and a final teaching moment for the community about the importance of protecting and cherishing authentic family relationships. "Our mother taught us that love is not just a feeling, but a choice," Jasfet said in his eulogy. "She chose to love us even when we didn't deserve it, even when we had been turned against her by lies and manipulation. She chose to forgive when forgiveness seemed impossible. She chose to rebuild when everything seemed broken beyond repair. But she also taught us that love doesn't mean being naive or defenseless. True love requires wisdom, discernment, and the courage to protect what is precious from those who would destroy it. She taught us to be generous with our trust, but not careless with it, to be forgiving, but not foolish." Philip added, "The greatest inheritance our mother left us is not money or property, but the knowledge of what genuine love looks like in action. She showed us that real love is patient, but not passive, kind, but not weak, forgiving, but not foolish. She proved that it's possible to survive betrayal and manipulation without becoming bitter or cynical, and that families can heal from even the deepest wounds if they're willing to choose truth over comfortable lies." Years after Danielle's death, her great-grandchildren would sometimes ask their parents and grandparents to tell them the story of how their family had almost been destroyed by lies, but had been saved by love and truth. The story became a family legend, passed down through generations as both entertainment and education. The family home in Abuja became a gathering place for extended family celebrations and a refuge for family members facing difficulties. The foundation that Jasfet and Felicia had established continued to grow and help other families, while Philip's business became a model for ethical entrepreneurship and family-friendly employment practices. The diamonds that had provided the initial wealth for the family's recovery were eventually donated to a museum, along with Matthew's journal and letters as part of an exhibit about the importance of preserving family history and learning from the past. But the most enduring legacy was not material. It was the knowledge that had been passed down through the family about the importance of loyalty, the danger of manipulation, the power of forgiveness, and the ultimate triumph of love over hatred. Dear friends, thank you so much for watching. Please support me by subscribing to my channel, and don't forget to like and share this video. It means the world to me. Take care of yourself and never forget how much you're loved. I can't wait to see you in the next video. Sending you all my love.